Pulp Fiction, the 1994 film directed by Quentin Tarantino, broke out and became an indie blockbuster, grossing $108 million on a $9 million budget. More importantly, it became a cultural touchstone for audiences in the 1990s and represented the shift from indies under boutique labels to big studio business. American independent cinema set the course for filmmakers we see today, such as Christopher Nolan and Greta Gerwig. These movies from the independent era also fostered an ethos that inspires today's content creators who share a similar interest in working outside the system. To understand how Pulp Fiction broke through, we need to understand how American independent movies broke through. We'll trace influential independent movies and how the independent film ethos influenced them. First, let's define what I mean when I say indie or independent movies. The definition originally meant movies financed and produced by companies and filmmakers outside the traditional studio system, dominated by what are called the Big Five. Filmmakers like John Cassavetes used money they secured, produced movies like A Woman Under the Influence, and screened at film festivals to secure distribution. Technically, that means Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, set up with major studio Paramount and later distributed by major studio Universal, isn't an independent movie. The definition shifted because in the 1990s and especially after 1994, major distributors got involved by setting up their own labels to distribute what they often call specialty films, like Searchlight at 20th Century Fox, now under Disney, and Focus Features, formerly USA Films at Universal. The label indie now encompasses independently financed movies and movies that target audiences who want something different from mainstream films. How did we get to this point? To get to 1994, we need to go back to 1975. Jaws came out in 1975 and set the course for mainstream Hollywood cinema. The Steven Spielberg film confirmed a way of moving forward with movies alongside 1970s movies like Star Wars, Superman, and Alien. The release of Jaws came as studios broke from the normal release strategy of city-by-city releases. This Broadway-style release strategy used for Bonnie and Clyde and worked for the, quote, new Hollywood movies that yielded success from word of mouth and media coverage by critics. Jaws came out as a wide-release film. By mass marketing Jaws with TV commercials, it created buzz from the start and became the highest-grossing movie up until that time. But to make a movie that would foster the buzz of a wide release and justify the initial print and advertising, P&A, studios moved toward a strategy of high-concept movies. Executives like Barry Diller at Paramount figured out how audiences wanted these sensory-fulfilling movies with his Movie of the Week work, previously at ABC. Other filmmakers, like producer and director Walter Hill, made B-movies, genre movies that played at drive-ins, and saw movies like Billy Jack and Death Race 2000 succeed better than some prestige A-list movies. Walter Hill thought if B-movies from producers like Roger Corman of American International Pictures, AIP, had A budgets, they would hit. Hill would produce Alien in 1979 and direct The Warriors and 48 Hours. Spielberg and George Lucas figured out that a lot of audiences their age grew up watching TV and grew up watching old movies like It's a Wonderful Life. They figured out that audiences loved these old movie stories and themes but liked the style of new Hollywood movies, influenced by European and Japanese cinema. These realizations set the course for mainstream Hollywood cinema. High-concept movies that offered thrills and told stories that harkened to the 1940s. And indie filmmakers hated it. Well, hate's a strong word. What emerged was more of a rebellion. Filmmakers wanted to tell stories about living authentic lives. Filmmakers like Jim Jarmusch and Susan Seidelman came to New York City in the mid-1970s. New York City during this time faced upheavals as the city endured bankruptcy, crime, and disruptions in historic communities. New York City also offered itself to possibility for people who didn't quite fit in. These early indie filmmakers lived in New York City as New York City birthed alternative art forms like punk, hip-hop, and graffiti art forms and genres that foregrounded marginalized groups and reconstructed old art into something new, stripped down, and energetic. Early indie filmmakers wanted to tell stories that diverged from Hollywood. They found influences in the DIY ethos of punk and hip-hop, as well as that ethos in French New Wave movies by directors like Jean-Luc Godard and Agnes Varda. These filmmakers used inexpensive cameras, found outside funding, and shot films on the fly in real locations contrary to Hollywood.
Garçon, 2 cafés.
Tarantino would later name his production company A Band Apart, a play on the French title of Godard's Band of Outsiders, Bande Apart. Filmmakers in the U.S. had long worked outside the studio system, especially for, quote, art films that targeted art audiences like Maya Deren's Meshes in the Afternoon, influential for David Lynch, or Stan Brakhage shorts. Indie filmmakers saw common calls with filmmakers John Cassavetes and Melvin Von Peebles. These filmmakers made Vanguard acclaimed movies by securing financing outside Hollywood through their own sources of credit lines, grants, and pre-release distribution funding. By the late 1970s, people figured out these patterns and benefited from New York's communities like the Collective for Living Cinema and local theaters like John Pearson's Bleecker Street Cinema. Producer Christine Vachon of Killer Films, who would produce Carol and Past Lives, talked about how in those days filmmakers would get money and, quote, freebies, friends' locations, family as cast, enough to make something. Quote, you would make half of it, make a reel of the good stuff, and try to raise money for the rest. New companies like Senacom and Skuros would buy distribution rights and distribute these movies in city-by-city releases at art houses and colleges after playing at film festivals. What led to Quentin Tarantino began with these filmmakers like Jim Jarmusch. Jarmusch came to New York City from Ohio in the mid-1970s at Columbia to study literature. Jarmusch became a part of the nascent punk scene and went to NYU's graduate film school. Jarmusch used money meant for NYU's tuition from a scholarship to fund a feature film called Permanent Vacation in 1980. Shot for $12,000 on 16mm color film stock, the film lets us walk through 1970s New York from the point of view of Allie, a Charlie Parker fan and hipster. The 75-minute film broke through at European film festivals. Not widely seen now, it put Jarmusch on the map with a lot of influential people. Jarmusch would use $7,000 in funds to produce a short film that later became Stranger Than Paradise. Screening the film, Jarmusch would raise the funds to shoot the feature version, about 3 offbeat people. Hungarian emigre Willie, his American friend Eddie, and his 16-year-old cousin Ava, moving from one place to another, searching for something they don't know they're missing. It sounds experimental, a black and white film shot as a series of master shot vignettes, but the comedy of the film helped the movie break out for audiences who wanted something different. Made for roughly $100,000, the movie grossed $2 million. It screened at the Collective for Living Cinema, influencing filmmakers like producer Vachon and especially Spike Lee. Spike Lee would say, quote, for me, the defining moment of film school was when Jim Jarmusch's Stranger Than Paradise became a hit. All of a sudden, we felt that making movies was now doable. A kind of template emerged. Filmmakers inspired by Jarmusch made low-budget films about offbeat characters talking about their lives and interests as they made their way in a world that felt unwelcoming. In an era where people listen to songs with titles like I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, movies like Smithereens, directed by Susan Seidelman, spoke to that real-world experience and conversation. Audiences grew for these movies because they wanted to see themselves on screen. Seidelman's 1982 film shows an offbeat woman inspired by the punk movement who uses every resource, every person, every opportunity to make her way to LA. It set up and celebrated the DIY ethos of people making their way. While it earned morsels compared to movies of that year like E.T., it got her notice and helped her land the hit Desperately Seeking Susan at Orion Pictures, co-starring Madonna. Before Mr. Pink, Steve Buscemi co-starred in Parting Glances, the 1986 Bill Sherwood movie about LGBT couple in the midst of HIV/AIDS. AIDS would devastate New York's creative community. Christine Vachon would reflect that during the mid to late 1980s, I went to a memorial service almost every week. The folks who supported Sherwood's movie were people who supported a movie about their life that wasn't sensational and that wasn't inhumane in a time when airlines could disallow anyone HIV/AIDS positive. Sherwood would later die of AIDS in 1990. The energy and urgency of movies about divergent lives helped Spike Lee become a major breakout. Lee grew up in Brooklyn and went to college at Morehouse in Atlanta. The son of jazz musician Bill Lee, Spike Lee came to NYU's graduate film school. In his third year, he made a thesis film called Joe's Bed-Stuy Barbershop, We Cut Heads, with $10,000 given by an early benefactor, his grandmother Zimmy. This short earned a Student Academy Award and was screened at local theaters and on PBS, where future benefactor and journalist Nelson George saw it. Lee had initially planned to make a feature called The Messenger with $20,000 sunk into pre-production, but additional funding fell through. Using New York Council for the Arts grants from The Messenger, he transferred funds to a new project about a young woman unsure about the man she can date and what she wants from any man. She's Gotta Have It. Inspired by Jarmusch, Lee shot She's Gotta Have It on black and white with cinematographer Ernest Dickerson and raised $40,000 to shoot it on the quick, 12 days, and with close friends and family involved on locations. Getting the footage was important. Lee screened the footage for John Pearson at Bleecker Street Cinema, who agreed to provide completion funds. The movie secured a premiere at the San Francisco Film Festival and built buzz that led to a Cannes Film Festival premiere and distribution from Indie Island Pictures. She's Gotta Have It would score $8 million in domestic rentals. If Jarmusch felt energized by punk, Lee felt energized by hip-hop and spoke to the audience that connected to hip-hop. Nelson George would say, quote, "Hip-hop was ascendant, and coming at the same time that Spike Lee was making black film ascendant." Lee would move on to mainstream studios, working with Columbia for his follow-up School Days about students at a historically black college and university. He would also gain visibility as he starred as his She's Gotta Have It character, Morris Blockman, in Nike commercials with Michael Jordan. More of the indie filmmakers found executives and companies interested in the work. As audiences emerged, companies would emerge interested in not just distribution, but also production. And as the word got out about new talent, film festivals became a bigger deal for discovering the next Spike Lee. 1989 marks a turning point for American independent movies. This was the year that independent movies moved from art house into serious business. To understand why, let's start at the end of 1989. In December 1989, a lot of kids had something dark on their Christmas shopping list: a VHS copy of Tim Burton's Batman. In the late 1970s, concurrently with the rise of independent movies, Japan's JVC released its first VHS tapes. VHS players and VHS tapes became big business as more consumers visited video stores who rented major releases, with revenue going back to the studios. But most VHS tapes cost too much for the average consumer until Batman, which came out in 1989 for $29.99, roughly $80 adjusted for 2025 prices. At the time, though, it was a steal. The accessibility of VHS tapes amplified a business opportunity. So a lot of people wanted to get into the movie business, including the indie movie business. These low-cost movies could do well enough domestically, but recoup costs at video stores and possibly home video purchases. Already, video stores like Kim's Video in New York put these indie movies on the forefront, as did Video Archives, a Los Angeles video store that featured workers Roger Avery and Quentin Tarantino. To get movies in theaters, a prerequisite for building enough buzz to generate rentals, companies had already emerged targeting indie movies like the Samuel Goldwyn Company, run by scion Samuel Goldwyn Jr. Samuel Goldwyn Pictures distributed Stranger Than Paradise and other indies like Desert Hearts. Most of these companies focused on distribution. They would pick up rights after seeing a finished or nearly completed film, called a, quote, negative pickup. Many of these companies didn't have the capital of a studio, so they didn't focus on production. Gradually, this changed. At the beginning of 1989, Sex, Lies, and Videotape premiered at the USA Film Festival in Utah. The debut of director Steven Soderbergh, a 26-year-old director who would make Ocean's 11 and Contagion, SLV subverted audiences with its provocative title. Instead of a movie like Fatal Attraction, Soderbergh's film featured adults dealing with the lack of control in their lives, especially their romantic inner lives. In a way, the movie critiqued Fatal Attraction and the audience's interest in movies like that. At the USA Film Festival, it became a sensation with a rapturous response at the still young film festival. Actor Edward Norton described the movie as, quote, the graduate for our generation. The distributor that would pick it up, Miramax, the studio of now disgraced moguls Bob and Harvey Weinstein. Miramax would become the success story of the 1990s. Why did Miramax succeed over the other companies? One, they had a stronger interest in moving outside the art house and city scene. Two, they were willing to use a lot of money to do that. They read the burgeoning audience interest in edgier movies, so they chose and marketed their movies highlighting their water-cooler conversation element, while also marketing their prestige as independent and auteur cinema. Miramax picked up the rights for Sex, Lies, and Videotape, originally set up by RCA, Columbia Home Video. When Soderbergh's film premiered at the 1989 Cannes Film Festival, it premiered alongside Spike Lee's film Do the Right Thing, a movie initially set up at Paramount before going to Universal. Both films created buzz, and Sex, Lies, and Videotape would win the 1989 Palme d'Or. In 1989, these films made over $30 million each in box office. Impressive numbers in 1989. Everyone in the business realized they needed to catch up. From this experience, Miramax and other companies started shifting from distribution into production. They could secure loans and lines of credit because of this success. As Elisa Parrott comments, companies like Miramax could show that, quote, a strong script with an edge could attract established talent, and this talent combined with savvy sales campaign and some good reviews could bring in solid box office. This shift meant creating buzz from film festivals. All of a sudden, the USA Film Festival became a big film festival and changed its name in 1991 to the Sundance Film Festival. Sundance originated from Robert Redford's 1968 purchase of property in Utah. Redford aimed to support an American cinema similar to Europe's. He offered his celebrity and financial capital to turn the property into a ski resort, with the idea that the ski resort would support the Sundance Institute, a nonprofit incubator of new filmmakers with classes and mentoring from industry professionals. Through the 1980s, both the ski resort and institute struggled, and the film festival only received 60 submissions in 1987. By 1992, the film festival received 400. A film festival that John Powers argued, quote, settled into complacent mediocrity whose axiom is play it safe, became a buzzworthy film festival, where companies like Miramax could discover new talent and market them as outsiders for audiences invested in the idea of outsiders. A film director like Richard Linklater could screen his offbeat film Slacker in 1990 and receive attention because he didn't live in Los Angeles. Linklater has always remained in Austin, Texas. A former college baseball player, Linklater co-founded the Austin Film Society and helped Austin become a hub of indie filmmakers like Robert Rodriguez and Wes Anderson. Slacker shows a series of connected stories in Austin, Texas life in a way that felt comic and easygoing. Filmmaker Kevin Smith cited Slackers as an inspiration for making his hit film Clerks. While Miramax secured foreign distribution rights for international films and edit them controversially for American audiences, they could go to Sundance or Toronto, build a relationship with filmmakers, and help connect them with talent while marketing them as auteurs, like Quentin Tarantino. A lot has been said about Tarantino's lack of film school credentials compared to directors like Jim Jarmusch and Spike Lee. The story, a video store clerk becomes a blockbuster filmmaker. In reality, Tarantino worked at a video store but also took acting classes and produced hard-to-find unfinished movies like My Best Friend's Birthday. He also took classes with the Sundance Institute, workshopping and developing a screenplay for what became Reservoir Dogs. Tarantino wrote Reservoir Dogs after watching heist films like Rafifi and The Killing as a video store clerk. He developed the idea of a story about a heist aftermath inspired by those movies and Hong Kong action movies like City of Fire. After meeting producer Lawrence Bender at a party, the script built buzz from Los Angeles from the Sundance Institute. Harvey Keitel read the script through a friend of Bender and offered to join in, helping them go from a $30,000 budget to an eventual budget of $1.3 million. Reservoir Dogs told the story of diamond thieves known by codenames like Mr. White and Mr. Pink coming together after everything with the heist went wrong. What unfolded was a story about secret identities with grisly rated-R violence. This intensity helped the movie at the 1992 Sundance Film Festival. While the previous film festival had earned notoriety due to controversial movies like Poison, directed by Todd Haynes, Reservoir Dogs took everyone's attention. Film exec and producer David Lind said, quote, everybody was freaked out about it. It was an intense movie in those days, and that kind of intensity didn't happen in independent movies. Reservoir Dogs marked the first of many existential conversations about independent film. By now, independent filmmaking had transformed from a handful of filmmakers into an ecosystem and an ethos. How did Tarantino's violent, more Hollywood-inspired genre film fit? What Tarantino brought to his films was an alignment with filmmakers like Gus Van Sant and Allison Anders, a desire to foreground the stories of outsiders and marginalized people, and a love of conversation as a form of conflict and energy. What he also brought was a love of 1970s B movies and the edge they had before they became A movies. I argue Tarantino understood that outsiders and marginalized people resonated with movies like Foxy Brown. If a lot of indie movies are about people trying to live their life like a movie, then Tarantino's movies feel like a reconstruction of these B movies, but from the point of view of people who aspired to live their life, like a Pam Grier movie. Miramax would pick up the controversial Dogs and distribute it, but with less success than hype. Ultimately, Reservoir Dogs swapped an average box office run with a highly successful video rental run. This helped everyone involved. For Miramax, this meant a buyout from Walt Disney Pictures. Disney had revitalized its brand and company by 1993 under Michael Eisner, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and Frank Wells. The Disney Renaissance was under full swing. But Disney had an interest in movies for adults, recognizing the limits of the Disney brand for this market. They created a mainstream brand called Touchstone Pictures, but they saw how the indie market was rising. Rather than create their own indie brand, Disney bought out Miramax, giving them relative autonomy and having a stake in this new indie market. By doing this first, Disney set the template for major studios creating their own indie brands. For many in the indie film ecosystem, this felt like a moment indie movies stopped being independent. For Miramax, this meant a solid financial backdrop to pursue more ambitious films and to better compete for filmmakers that wanted indie backing and setup. Miramax still wanted to be in the Tarantino business. After Reservoir Dogs, Tarantino set up his next feature, Pulp Fiction, at TriStar under Sony, until they put the script in turnaround, putting the script to sell to buyers. Miramax bought the script, co-written by Tarantino's Video Archives co-worker, Roger Avary. Pulp Fiction tells a series of interconnected stories about characters involved with an organized crime boss named Marcellus Wallace. But the stories connect to the idea of people living in their internal movie. Bruce Willis's Butch thinks he's living in The Champ. Now, Pumpkin and Honey Bunny think they're living in Bonnie and Clyde. We see characters living in their movies face a real-life situation that upends the movie they think they're living in, then grappling with moving forward. Because of Reservoir Dogs' buzz, Miramax secured top talent at union-scale rates to keep the budget down. A-list actors like Bruce Willis and Uma Thurman joined a still relatively known Samuel L. Jackson and former star John Travolta for a $9 million movie, a small budget for a Hollywood movie, but an enormous sum for an indie. Pulp Fiction premiered at Cannes in 1994 and won the Palme d'Or. The controversial win began Pulp Fiction's ascendancy as the film's controversy and video store success of Reservoir Dogs led to an $108 million gross. By 1994, everyone knew about indie films and indie directors. Major filmmakers like Paul Thomas Anderson, Christopher Nolan, and later Greta Gerwig would emerge from indie films in this ecosystem of film festivals to studios. Popular specialty studios like A24 and Neon still follow this process in selecting many of their titles. I would argue that today's content creators and YouTube videographers see themselves in the same light as these indie filmmakers. They view their work, especially the videos about real life, as something they can only do outside the system. It's not surprising how influential indie filmmakers have been on these creators and other filmmakers because the indie movement showed how great art can come from anywhere.